So a few weeks ago, I was at my brother's house and he had me try his VR headset. And I put it on and suddenly I was sitting in the cockpit of an airplane flying over Japan. And I've done VR before, so it's not unfamiliar to me, but every time there's a moment where I have to remind myself that this isn't real. Right? Because I'll be honest, I get vertigo and I feel viscerally ungrounded in this virtual space, right? It's a very strange sensation for me. So I was curious about this whole idea of how my body and my brain reacted in this space. Like it's a trip when you really think about it. And so I got pretty deep into the research, but stick around because this is another one of those those explorations that ultimately get me connecting the dots back to branding. So proprioception here is this built-in sense of where your body is in space, right? And when what you're seeing doesn't match what your body physically feels, that mismatch is what sends your brain into that sort of vertigo, ungrounded feeling. So this totally blew my mind. So it made me wonder if my brain can be convinced that something is real when it isn't, right? What else is shaping my experience of the world without me even realizing it? And that question eventually led me to a bunch of psychology called embodied cognition. So this might feel like a detour, but there's some genuinely strange brain and body science that I want to get into. So I promise by the end, though, that this does connect directly to why a physical presence can influence your brand, and maybe more than you think. So embodied cognition is basically the idea that thinking doesn't happen in your brain alone, right? Your body is constantly feeding your brain information about the world and your environment. And that information shapes how you experience it. And it turns out this system is a lot easier to fool than you'd think, right? There's a well-known experiment where researchers convince people that, get this, a fake rubber hand is actually their own hand. Just by touching the real hand and the fake one at exactly the same time with the same kind of touch in the same spot, within a minute, most people's brains fully buy into it. I feel like I need a rubber hand as a prop or something. It should be a Halloween video, right? So people described feeling the touch as coming from the rubber hand itself. Some people's real hand even dropped in temperature, like the brain decided, whoa, I guess we don't need that, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. So, and I don't know if you guys ever did this, but did you ever take your hand and put it up against your friend's hand? And when you touch the two fingers at the same time, you get that kind of creepy feeling, but you're not quite sure where their hand is and where your hand is. That was your brain running the same science experiment that was studied in that lab, right? So proprioception isn't just about knowing where your hand is. It's part of how your brain decides what's real, what's yours, what do we trust here, right? Which is exactly why that VR plane cockpit got me, right? Same mechanism. My eyes were seeing a plane like bank and tilt through the clouds. And then my body was sitting still on my brother's living room floor. And just like that rubber hand, my eyes won. Like I felt like I was in the sky, vertigo and the bad flying and all, because I'm pretty sure I'd be a bad pilot. Even though every logical part of me knew better, right? Your brain is constantly cross-checking what you see against what you feel. But when you're actually standing somewhere in a physical environment, there's no disagreement to referee, right? Everything lines up. And that's why a physical experience sticks in a way that like scrolling on a screen doesn't. This got me curious about what's actually happening with retail versus online, right? Out in the real world, a virtual space to shop in versus a real space to shop in. Turns out, despite everything I've heard of over the last decade, about 83% of US retail spending still happens in physical stores. E-commerce is growing, but it hasn't taken over the way that we thought it would, right? Or at least the way I thought it would. And here's what I think is actually going on. Physical stores aren't just a place to complete a transaction, right? Because a physical space is an experience. Websites can't even touch that. And I did web design and development for years, and I know a good website is built to move you toward checkout quickly, efficiently, and with as little friction as possible. A physical space, it's not doing that. It shouldn't be doing that, right? It isn't trying to close a sale as fast as possible, but it is making you feel something while you're standing in it, right? So a few months ago, I was in Mendocino, a small Northern California coastal town, with a friend, and we stumbled into this tiny converted shed, barely bigger than a walk-in closet, really, that a woman had turned into a little small retail shop. She sold vintage fabric that she converted into linens, like tablecloths and pillowcases and blankets, things like that. And the whole space was packed, floor to ceiling, with products she clearly loved making. And here's the thing, the smallness of that space is exactly what made it work. Every inch of that space was covered. I could see everything she'd made practically at an arm's length in a space that felt more like stepping into a collection, like someone's personal collection, than a store. And it was a very intimate experience. And then down the street, we found a co-op. There was like 4 or 5 different makers sharing the same space. And the woman that we spoke to in that shop said that each maker takes a day of the week to be there. So you walk in on a Tuesday and one maker is there, and then you walk in on a Saturday and you get to meet someone new. So both of these small businesses felt so charming. But after going down this recent rabbit hole, I started to wonder if what I'd stumbled onto there in Mendocino was actually part of a bigger trend. So I looked into it, and it turns out retail isn't dying. It's reorganizing, right? It's kind of evolving, I guess. Store openings are currently outpacing closures. Retailers are investing in physical space again. And here's the detail that surprised me. It's Gen Z, the generation that grew up entirely on digital, that's part of what's driving people back into physical spaces. So nearly 4 in 10 said that they plan to shop in person for gifts recently. And the generation we assumed would kill retail is actually asking for something physical and tactile, right? Something real, which I found fascinating, but not really surprising, because I did a whole video on nostalgia and Gen Z buying behavior. So I kind of got where that was going. But this is where I think it's important for most brands to pay attention, though, because you're probably not thinking, great, I need a physical store. In this economy, you're probably thinking, how could I possibly afford that, right? And that's a fair question. So commercial leases aren't cheap, right? And for most small business owners, signing one right now feels like a real risk. But here's what's interesting. The businesses that are actually pulling this off aren't signing traditional leases at all. They're going small, really small, kind of like that shop we found in Mendocino. And I can't help but notice the parallel to the tiny home movement. It feels like the same concept anyway. So the businesses that can do this are starting with a version of retail that's small enough to feel possible right now. And check this out. There are actually some small towns across the country who have been doing exactly this, literally in some cases with sheds. So in Muskegon, Michigan, the city built a cluster of small shed-style shops on a vacant downtown lot back in 2016, and they called it Western Market. These are actual small sheds built specifically to give retailers a low-cost way in. And it started with 12, and it's grown to 17. I don't know how many they have there now. They had everything from a tea shop to embroidery to handmade goods, and the city's own development office credits it as one of the downtown's strongest small business incubators. And then in Albany, New York, the state took a different approach, but it's kind of the same idea. So they renovated an underused downtown park, and they installed shipping containers, literally the same kind of containers people convert into tiny homes, and they lease them out to entrepreneurs and small businesses as retail space alongside pop-up tents and stalls. So now if you're sitting there thinking that's great, but I still don't have the money for any of this, here's something interesting. My experience with that VR headset and this whole rabbit hole of research made me realize that nowadays a physical experience can exist almost anywhere. It's kind of on a spectrum. And there's an entry point at almost every budget, I would think. At the simplest end, right, presence can be a live, just virtual gathering with people who already buy from you, right? Maybe it's over Zoom. Sama Tea does this. So subscribers get tea shipped to them, and then they join a live Zoom tasting with the founders and they taste together, asking questions in real time. So there's no storefront required for this, just people live experiencing something all at the same time, right? So you also have the farmers markets where people meet you and your work directly. So there's no middleman, no algorithm, there's no storefront, right? That's literally how Lumiere started. They're a candle maker who began at a stall in Pike Place Market in Seattle before ever having a storefront. And then there's the shared co-op space, like the one that I found in Mendocino, where the cost and the risk get split among several makers instead of one. So physical presence isn't about the square footage, right? It's about the experience, the connection, and the feeling that you create, right? But why does a physical space actually help connect a brand, right? And how do you build that experience? So it comes down to something simple, I believe. The more senses a space involves, the more your brain locks it in. Not just what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you touch. So Starbucks understood this early. They deliberately grind coffee in store instead of using pre-ground beans, specifically for the smell. And they've even pulled menu items when the aroma interfered with it. And Lincoln hired a professional perfumer to create a custom scent for their showrooms. Neither of those are accidents, right? They're brands, engineering, and experience that your body actually has to be present for. But a physical presence isn't powerful just because a physical place exists, right? It's powerful because of the different embodied sensory layers of that experience. A smell, a sound, a texture, a person standing in front of you. That's the experience you're actually engineering, whether it's a storefront, a market table, or a Zoom room, right? With real people in it. So physical space matters, but it's not necessarily about square footage. And the sense that matters the most is an actual person, right? When people can see you, hear you, watch you do the thing you do, it's another signal your brain is built to respond to. It's a human signal, right? And it's part of the same wiring as everything else we've talked about. So if you're thinking about how your brand is going to show up in the world, don't wait until you have the perfect storefront if you think that you need one, right? Start with what you already have, a small space, a table, a shed, or even a virtual space, a Zoom room, a Facebook group. Just be the human who's actually there, because people aren't only experiencing your product or services, they're experiencing you too. So if you're a small business that's looking for a physical space or have one, or have found alternatives to that, feel free to leave a comment. I'm curious. If you're as curious as I am about human behavior, brand psychology, you might be interested in this video. So that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Anyway, until next time, you guys have a beautiful day.